Good morning everyone, my name is Michelle, I hope you're doing well. Welcome to another video. It is Saturday morning, the 2nd of November. And yesterday was the first full day of the defence's case in chief in the Delphi case, the state of Indiana versus Richard Allen. The defense have been stymied at every single opportunity. Horrendous. We're going to talk specifically about Steve Mullen. Some of you might have seen this, but this is a little video that I put on Michelle Walks yesterday. I'm going to play it here. This is Andrea Burkhart's assessment of Steve Mullen.
Mr. Mullen has the intellect of like a Labrador, you know, a medium intelligent dog, but not a Vizsla. I mean, I'm just saying, he's no hunting dog. He's like a good retriever. And Mr. McClelland is no idiot. He's not an idiot. So why would they do something so stupid as to use these confessions? Whose idea was this? Who's pushing this? And I'm just thinking back on how unprepared they were. Like they don't even want to, because they know this is bullshit.
It's time for you guys to start being journalists.
Before an angry Andrew Baldwin left the courthouse, 13 News overheard him speaking to Richard Allen's wife, saying, "It ain't over. The world's watching. The world sees what's going on."
For those of you who think I'm being flippant and inappropriate for laughing during my videos, well, you've got to laugh. You've got to laugh at how utterly ridiculous this is. You've got to laugh. I want you to cry. So Steve Mullen, for those that don't know, he's been there in the courtroom. He got special permission to stay for the whole time. So he's seen all the witnesses and he went to the stand a few times for various things during the state's case in chief. So he's now on the stand again. Wish TV's pool notes really don't do this justice. I think they gave a brief overall view, which is fair enough, but you've got to listen to the YouTubers who are in court to get the full feel of how this went down. And I am going to play a little clip from Defence Diaries from Bob, who's been in the courtroom every day. But anyway, Steve Mullen's on the stand. He's being questioned by Andrew Baldwin. So he was the Delphi PD police chief at the time of the murders. He now works as an investigator for Carroll County. He now works with Nick McClelland. So, yes, of course, he's terribly, terribly biased. And I'm sure he didn't appreciate being brought to the stand to be questioned by the defence. And they have had some hostile witnesses. They have. And many, many, many objections. So very difficult for them to actually get anywhere. Yeah, stymied at every level. Stay to the end. I'm going to talk about the motions also that were denied. So the first question from the defence: how important would you say it is to preserve evidence? It's important to everyone, Mullen says. Andrew Baldwin then asked, how important would it be to alert the defence if there's missing evidence? Been following the case, you know absolutely what he's talking about, because Steve Mullen was the man in charge when a whole bunch of interviews were lost in February of 2017. So Nick McClelland, objection! Sidebar. Baldwin implied evidence in the Delphi Murders case had gone missing, which indeed it had. And it was kept from the defence for a long time. Baldwin wanted the jury to understand about all of this evidence, potential suspects who were questioned. And that evidence has just been completely lost due to, quote-unquote, technical difficulties. So Mullen admitted on the stand under oath that important interviews from dozens of witnesses had been lost February 14th for a week, and then a load later in March. Mullen said they only found out about it in August, that they discovered the problem. I don't know that I believe that. But anyway, Baldwin asked, was there a single person that was re-interviewed? Because their original interviews had gone missing. I believe there was, but I don't recall, Mullen said. He couldn't answer without refreshing his memory. They found out about this in August of last year. The defence didn't find out about it until February of this year. They said they didn't have a list of all the people that they'd interviewed, but it turns out that actually there may be a list. Because if the defence had been given the list of all the people who were interviewed and then whose interviews had been lost, the defence could have worked to re-interview them. They could have done it themselves. No. They were told there was no list. Let's talk about Brad Webber, the white van man. Brad Webber, the state are now claiming, drove by in his van. The drive to his house goes under the south side of the bridge. Left work at 2:02 p.m, 20 to 25 minutes away. So they're estimating that his van went by at 2:27 to 2:30. So I've talked about all of this in a video, and I talked about it all in my live stream yesterday, just how ridiculous this is, this 2-minute window. Absolutely ridiculous. Brad Webber lives off County Road 625 West. Mullen said that he met with Webber of August of this year, but didn't tape record the interview. I could have, but I didn't, he said. Webber had testified on Wednesday that he worked the first shift at Subaru near Lafayette and clocked in at 5:41, clocked out at 2:02. Next question to Mullen involved whether his interview with Webber saw any inconsistencies. Yes, there was some conflict about it, Mullen said. Okay. We'll come back to Brad Webber in a second. But Baldwin switched gears a little bit and said, how long have you believed that only one person was involved in the murders of Abby and Libby? Since the arrest of Richard Allen, said Mullen. Tob Leesenby, by the way, who was then sheriff of Carroll County, but apparently didn't have very much to do with the investigation, even though he was sheriff at the time. Dear me. Said he believed that more than one person was involved, and he continued to believe that there was more than one person involved for a long time, even after the arrest of Richard Allen, because of the crime scene. But Mullen said, it doesn't really matter what I believe. Oh, really? Okay, you're one of the main investigators on the case, and it doesn't matter what you believe. Oh. Baldwin then asked questions about two of the state's witnesses who were supposedly the people who basically bookended Richard Allen's time at the trials, based on what was in the PCA. Dan Dullard, who interviewed Richard Allen on the 18th of February 2017, Rick said that he was there between 1:30 and 3:30. Turns out he wasn't. Turns out he left between 1:30 and 1:45. However, Betsy Blair and Sarah Carbo, they're the people that the state have said Betsy Blair saw him on the bridge at 2. And then Sarah Carbo saw him, like the muddy and bloody man, at 3:57. I don't believe that Betsy Blair and Sarah Carbo saw Rick Allen. I don't believe they did. I think Sarah Carbo's just lying. Anyway, this line of questioning resulted in a sidebar. Then Baldwin asked Mullen about the sticks. Mullen said, I don't know anything about the sticks. I don't know. We also found out that there's a trail camera. There's a trail camera. Where's the trail camera? Well, it's on top of the hill. Crime scene's about here. Top of the hill, somewhat northwest of the bodies. So about here. So I'm going to turn this over to Bob now, who caught every question. And I think this is really important.
Remember these questions. Remember these questions. Please, because they're asking them to every witness for a reason, and they're locking them in their answers for a reason. They have a response to all of these questions. and they're locked into them. They've asked it to every single cop that's gotten on the stand, all these same questions. So it's your theory depends. Like, your theory is that the phone never left from being under Abby's body, right? Nope, it never left. Richard Allen never left with the phone, correct? Nope, never left with the phone. Do you think that Richard Allen returned to the scene? I don't know. That's his answer for that.
The state's theory is that Libby's phone that was found under Abby's body didn't move after 2:32. They're claiming that Rick Allen was seen by Sarah Carbo at 3:57, after being scared away by Brad Webber, who drove by on the south side at 2:30. So the girls had to be marched down the hill, across the creek, up the other side, murdered, and Abby redressed by 2:32. And then apparently he stayed around for ages, even though he'd been scared away, until he was seen by Sarah Carbo at 3:57. No, it doesn't make sense, does it? No, okay.
He switches gears. Did the search ever come within 100 feet of the girls? He says, I don't know. And then we switch over to the trail cams. He says, so the trail cams, is there anything relevant that was seen on the trail cams? He says, well, so we finally hear about the mystery trail cams. It says there is a trail cam, and then it showed some searchers in frame, but I don't know the distance. So this goes on forever, this trail cam battle. There's a recollection is refreshed. He says, what did the trail cam reveal in terms of how close the people were to the bodies? He says, his answer is, the camera shows that somebody's in front of the camera. I can't give you a distance. I cannot give you a distance. So he says, so where's the location of the trail cam? So he says, he goes over the map. He says, it's north of the creek, kind of on the top of this hill. So he says, it's northwest of the crime scene. And he said, what day was it that you can see the person on the trail cam? And he says, on the 14th. He says, oh, really? He's like, are you sure that it's not the 13th? He has to go and refresh his recollection. And he says, so they were directly in front of that camera on the 13th. And he says, yes, after he refreshes his recollection. He said, how would you describe the area that the crime scene is in? He's like, it's got layers. And then, I consider it to be on a floodplain. And then there's a bowl. It's like a bowl. And then he says, so how many tips out of the 14,000 tips came in were about Richard Allen? And he says, one. He says, wait, it's like that wasn't a tip, right?
That was Rick Allen calling in to say he was there. Called in on the 16th, saying he was there.
Richard Allen came in and self-reported, right? Came in and told you all he was out at the trail and on the bridge, right? It's like, yeah, that wasn't a tip. He told us he was out on the trails.
So in 5.5 years, even though Rick Allen continued to work at CVS, nobody called in about him in 5.5 years.
So he says, how many people were searching for the girls on the 13th? He says, I don't know. Was there a list? He's like, only the firefighters. Oh, he's like, oh, you mean the report that we put into evidence? That's the only list. So only the firefighters. So the investigators didn't create any lists about who were searching, but the firefighters did.
Yeah, because the firefighters have got a better understanding of how to do search and rescue. That you need to know who is out there, because you could have the killer out there in the search party interfering with evidence or leading people up a garden path. But no. Tobe Leesenby, by the way, said he'd never investigated a murder. As sheriff of Carroll County for years, he never investigated a murder. So these guys, they're just clueless.
And I loved this question, this next question. I just love it. Love it. Was there a concern that maybe the girls had fallen into the water? And he says that was a concern. It just solidifies that they definitely would have been looking hard in that river.
Because some of the claws were found in the creek. Now, the claws were found in this area. Now, it's my understanding that they were looking downstream. The creek flows this way. Eventually, it joins the Wabash River. Because if they thought the girls had fallen off the bridge, which would have been what I thought, looking at that scene, I'd have slightly fallen off the bridge. They were looking downstream, so honestly, I'm not sure they were looking here, like upstream.
He's like, why did it take the Unified Command so long to get Kelsey's DNA? He's like, I don't know.
Well, if you don't know, as an investigator for Carroll County, Incompetence.
Who would know the most about Liberty German's cell phone data? It's like Christopher Cecil. It's like, all right. He says, did multiple tipsters call in saying that they recognized the bridge guy's voice? It's like, oh yeah. It's like, what, dozens? There's more than that. He's like, hundreds? He's like, it's possible.
And none of them identified Richard Allen, even though he must have served loads of people who lived in Delphi. But nobody rang in about Richard Allen being the bridge guy. Either ID'd him visually or ID'd him by his voice. Now this is obviously to contradict Brian Harshman, the star witness, who listened to hundreds of hours of Richard Allen's prison phone calls. Said, yes, he's definitely bridge guy. I recognise his voice anywhere. No one else did, though.
All right, so McClellan's cross. So he focuses on one thing and one thing alone. Like, he didn't care about any of the other shit. And he says, so you interviewed Weber, correct? And you called him, right? You called him to tell him to come in, correct? He's like, yes, I did. And you didn't tell him what the topic of the interview was going to be about, right? Not at all. He says, that's correct. That's correct. And he says, and then when he did come in, you recorded that interview, right? He's like, yes, I did. And he said he drove a van, right? He said, yes. And he said he verified that, correct? With phone records, that he drove his van. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, what the hell?
How can you verify with phone records that you drove your van?
Like, what is that? Like, what is that? What does that mean? So he clarifies. He's like, yes. He said that he had looked at his text messages and was able to figure out that he had driven his van that day. And then he says, okay. And then and he said, as far as Brad Weber, he gave his SIG over to police. He offered it up for testing, right? He says, yes, he did. And law enforcement returned that weapon to him, correct? Yeah. And Oberg said that if she were to test it now, that she could exclude it, right? Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Even though she didn't when she tested it originally.
Brad Weber, his SIG Sauer, as it stands right now, was not excluded, correct? He's like, I don't know.
Well, Melissa Oberg said it wasn't.
This is my favorite question of the day. He's like, you know what's really interesting? He's like, that's interesting. He's like, that's interesting. So you say that that Brad Weber had reviewed his text messages to determine that he had been driving his van that day, right? That's what you said when Nick was asking you that question? So it's interesting because why would he be reviewing his text messages about whether or not he had driven his van after you called him if he didn't know what he was going to be talking about? That was mic drop time. It was mic drop time.
Ha!
I mean, he got him. He nailed him right there. Just nailed him. And Mullen's answer, he's like, that is interesting. He's like, I have no explanation. That is interesting.
If Mullen rang Brad Weber, he got no idea what they were going to talk about. Well, if that's true, someone else from the state had spoken to him previous, hadn't they? Had got to him previous. Now, this is no surprise. There's nothing surprising whatsoever about this van. As I've stated yesterday in my live stream, Monica Waller, who was sniffing about in loads of Delphi Facebook groups, would have known about vans, various vans, and they'd have known that Brad Weber drove a van. They'd also have known he got home around 3:30. So now, why have they switched his timeline to 2:30? Why? This is stuff you're not getting from the mainstream media. All right, let's talk about the motions. So she's granted a motion for inmate Jesse James to be transported to the courtroom. However, she denied the motion, the second attempt of this trial, to get Odinism back in. No, the state hasn't opened the door to things connected to Odinism. So, no, still out. Odin's still gone. Also, a witness, an FBI agent, surname is Paul, who interviewed Brad Weber in 2017. But he lives in Texas now, and he's got some health issues. So he's working, but it's like election time, so it'd be difficult for him to get time off his job, and also he can't fly because of his health. And they wanted to interview him via video conferencing. And they said they'd only take like half an hour to interview him. But no, that's been denied. So the guy who interviewed Brad Weber in February of 2017, nope. So the trial continues this morning, Saturday, and they do the half a day on Saturday. So the defence's case in chief continues, stymied at every opportunity. But the state's theory doesn't make sense, and that's obvious to anybody who isn't just a sheeple ignoring all the blatant problems with the state's theory. The lack of evidence against Richard Allen, the fact that the state has nothing, the fact that the confessions were done when Allen was in a state of psychosis. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.
Oh, needle. Oh, needle.